Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, even at home. We provide compassionate, caring support virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here.
Hello and welcome into the Republic of Football podcast. I'm your host, Carter Yates. Joining me from Austin, Texas is new dad, Mike Craven. How's it feel?
Pretty good. The jokes are going to start flying. My sense of humor will probably take a hit. Sleeping not a ton, but she's in the NICU right now. She was born 4 weeks before we thought she would. Born before we even had a name for her. So that was kind of an interesting little deal for the first 48 hours, but it's great. She should be home soon. So everything's good in my neighborhood.
Shout out those NICU nurses. My fiance is a NICU nurse. And every time I come home from work and want to throw a complaint about, what's going on, I just eat it. It doesn't matter. Not serious.
No doubt about that. I can't say enough about St. David's North here in Austin. That's where she's been. So you're right. NICU nurses deserve all the credit. Probably pay raise.
Yes, exactly. So excited to have you on. Excited to have you back to talk some spring games and some spring storylines, guys. The spring games are dead, I think, in college football or nearing extinction. We're going to talk our thoughts on that and then roll into a little spring storyline draft for all the Texas teams this spring ball. So start off. Texas cancels the spring game a couple weeks ago. The issue they cite is just body blows, right? Steve Sarkisian says they played 30 games in the last 2 years. This also comes on the heels of Nebraska and USC canceling their spring games. Matt Rule cited tampering as the biggest reason he doesn't want to do the spring game anymore. He says, why am I going to showcase my entire roster for a nation when there's a 10-day spring transfer portal window coming April 16th to April 25th? And obviously a lot of the spring games come before that spring transfer portal window. Craven, what are your thoughts just overall on spring games kind of nearing extinction? It seems like this is the big trend now.
Not sure if you're a Monty Python fan, but in the Holy Grail,
Yes.
There's a scene where, the guy's trying to put his dad into the death cart and the dad's like, I'm not dead yet. And it's like, you'll be stone dead in a moment. Like that's been spring games for a couple of years. I remember being at Houston for a magazine stop a couple of years ago when Dana Holgerson was still the coach. And he pitched this exact scenario that with the transfer portal, with NIL, with the tampering, and with your roster just in flux, because remember, let's say you lose 20 guys due to graduation, just normal attrition. You lose another 15 to the transfer portal. That's 35 guys on an 85 scholarship roster that are gone by the spring. You got 10 or 15 probably dealing with injuries that aren't going to be back either. So we've seen more and more of these teams not be able to put on a true spring games like the one we probably grew up going to and enjoying as college football fans. I think this ends up going to more of a spring OTA with more of the ability to practice hard in, say, June, once you have your finalized roster. Because you hear coaches say all the time, like, one, why am I putting in resources to guys that can just leave next week? I'm going to spend 15 practices on this backup left guard, and now he's going to a different school. Or why are we going to practice for 15 practices in spring when 3 or 4 of our starters that we know for sure aren't even getting here till June 1? And so I just think it's outlived its purpose, and it always goes back to the same issue, and that's the calendar no longer matches the sport.
Yes, the calendar is broken for sure. For you as a college football fan, someone who covers this sport, are you sad spring games are gone? Are you don't care? Are you good riddance? What is your personal feeling on this?
Probably as a fan, I'm sad that they're gone. I understand why they're gone. If I was a coach, I'd want them gone. If I was a player, I'd want them gone. Like I understand why. Like a lot of times things are happening in college football and I don't understand why they're happening. This one, I get why it's happening. But one of my favorite memories growing up is going to the Texas spring game. You know, you could sit anywhere. It was free. You got to see those backups that maybe, you had heard about as recruits, and then they redshirted. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, there's Cedric Benson, or, oh, there's Selvin Young, or any of those guys that kind of exploded at a spring game. You saw what happened to like Malik Murphy a few years ago. There's always those kind of fun stories. You see some true freshmen that were enrolled early. And for a lot of people, it's your only chance to go to that stadium and watch the team play. I mean, it's so expensive now. A family of four to go to a Texas football game is probably close to four figures. And so you could take 3 or 4 of your kids and go to the spring game and get some autographs and watch the team play. And it kind of felt a little bit of like a holdover, like something to kind of like an oasis in the desert of the off season to go watch some football. So I'm sad it's gone from just from a viewership standpoint, but also the spring games that have been going on the last 4 or 5 years aren't what we remember them as anyway. So we're probably have lost the thing that we're sad about already. And this is just the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, your second point you're making about the affordability for the fans. I saw Chip Patterson, CBS Sports, wrote a column about this, and I really agreed with it. You mentioned you got to take out a loan basically to go to a Texas football game now. They're also increasing season ticket costs by $13 a game because of the talent fee, basically. You saw Tennessee do that. With NIL, the fans are having to pay more for the players, of course, so they can have the most competitive teams, but it's made college football not really affordable, and you're just losing another chance to build lifelong fans. I mean, you, Craven, growing up in Austin, had experience going to DKR. I had experiences going to DKR. There are fewer and fewer families, I feel like, who can have those experiences because they're just getting priced out, and I think college football will be worse off in the long run for it. I mean, do you think it's a big deal, or do you think it's not even a big deal?
I don't think it's a big deal because in 5 or 10 years, it'll be the new normal. I mean, you used to be able to go to football practices, right? Like when I was a kid, you could go sit and watch Mac Brown's football practices like at the bubble, like right outside.
Could you imagine that now with Steve Sarkisian there?
You could go watch, Roy Williams go up against Nathan Vasher in practice. Like you could just go watch that stuff. And that ended, if I remember correctly, it ended because Jordan Shipley got hurt and his parents found out through a message board before practice even ended. Right. And that's kind of how that went away. But now it'd be absurd to even think about going to practices. Like you said, Steve Sarkisian, like, that's not even a thought process. Media is not even allowed at most practices around this state and around the country. So I don't think it'll be a huge deal. Like what happens in the fall is what matters the most. And after this goes away for a few years, and I'm sure they'll find a new way to go about doing something for the fans. It sounds like Oklahoma canceled their spring game, but they're doing some kind of fan jamboree type combine type deal. We've seen Ole Miss kind of lean into that in kind of a carnival type way. So they'll find a way to keep the fans engaged and give the kids something to do. But I don't think it impacts what we see on the field. I think that gets done in the summer, that gets done in the fall. I think fans will get over it as long as their team is successful.
Oh, I don't think it's going to impact the fall at all. I mean, you already know pretty much what your depth chart's going to look like come fall camp. You don't need the spring game for that. Basically, it through spring practices. At least I think. I don't think the spring game matters as much for like, okay, who's going to go out and win the job here? But it is about the kids, for me at least, and just the experience of going to the games and seeing the stadium. So I really like what Lane Kiffin does at Ole Miss, the Oak Grove games or something like that, where it's like hot dog eating contests and like skills positions. Because I saw Chip Patterson made this point too. It's like, they just need like some cheerleaders and the band members and a whistle and a stadium. And it doesn't need to be a competitive game. These games have never been all that competitive. So I don't think it'll affect the fall product whatsoever, but I would like to see fans get thrown a bone. You know what I mean? Because of all the costs that are going up for them in this new corporatization of college football.
Totally agree. And I don't want to speak for you. If like for myself personally, like, I wasn't the greatest student in the world. Like, I didn't love school tremendously, but I spent so much time on college campuses because of college football and what my grandfather did and going to these spring games and stuff, to where like, that's where I wanted to be. Like, I wanted to go to college because of those experiences, because I got to see the pomp and the circumstance and hear the band and see the cheerleaders and the co-eds on campus when you're 12 years old. And it's like, dude, this is what I want to do at 19. But
and your dad's like elbowing you like, you're going to love college, son.
Right. You're right. Like, it's just a way to kind of pass that down and to your point, kind of build a fan for a lifetime, and to give people who maybe aren't the greatest athletes or like something to like want to go do and be a part of. I think we're kind of losing that as this becomes more and more corporate, like the NFL. Just the family kind of community passion of it is not as inclusive as it used to be. And this is another step in that direction.
So a big reason the spring games are up in the air and maybe going to go extinct is because this spring calendar's messed up right now. And I think everybody agrees with that. It's not a hot take by me saying it. Craven, what's your solution to fix the spring calendar? I know you wanted to talk about, I think you've got some solutions maybe. I want to hear what you got to say about this.
Yeah, last season I put out how I would change college football, and a lot of it was just about the calendar. And not a lot of the coaches don't agree with me on this, and so I don't think it'll eventually happen. But I would get rid of the winter transfer portal period completely. Like, I don't understand why we do free agency in the middle of a football season. Football used to be a 1-semester sport. Now is a 2-semester sport because the playoff dips into January. So I would just get rid of that completely. That would allow high school athletes to have bigger shine, recruiting to go back as normal. And I think it would allow some guys that like maybe they didn't like where they were on the depth chart in the fall. The smoke clears in the spring. Some guys graduate and all of a sudden it's like, hey, man, I could start at left guard. Like, I don't need to go somewhere else to do this. I can get some playing time here. So I think we'd see less movement that way. I would make spring practice OTAs. I would make it individual camp stuff. I wouldn't put pads on. I wouldn't have them banging together for 15 practices. I'd make it more like the NFL OTAs, and then I'd move those 15 spring practices to June. Usually everybody on your football team is going to be on campus by that first weekend in June. That's when the new freshmen move in. That's when the transfer portal guys that didn't get there in the spring move in. That's when I would suit it up, have 15 practices, and then reconvene in August somewhere. That's how I would go about fixing the spring calendar. And then have the transfer portal in April and May at the end of the academic school year, because we're still trying to pretend like this is college.
Big key, trying to pretend this is college. Are we allowed in our hypothetical candy land here to say there's one transfer portal window? That's how we'd fix the calendar?
Yeah.
Or do we have to go to?
Yeah. No, I think there's eventually going to be one. I just think it'll stay the winter one for some reason. And it's just because coaches want the control of having the rosters together for as long as possible. That's my opinion on that.
So you would rather have only a spring one than a winter one?
Yes, I would.
Okay. So I like the spring if you keep the spring transfer portal window, you move spring practice to after the spring transfer portal window. That way you're practicing with guys who you know are going to be on the team.
Right.
Is June too... It's kind of like a happy medium, right? Because you could either go training camp. If you're going to go full NFL, just make it like training camp in August, in late July is my deal. Like, let's stop pretending this is college football. It is college football, but it's NFL model. Let's go OTAs and then just go training camp in August. What do you think about that? Because I don't know, spring camp in June seems like kind of a no man's land a little bit.
Yeah, it could be. Maybe it's the end of May, early June. And I don't think it'd be traditional. You're not doing 2-a-days anymore. Like, I don't think it's a gladiator sport in the spring like we think of it at sometimes. In a lot of ways, it is OTAs already, except for maybe 3 or 4 of those practices. So I think coaches would be smart in June. I don't think you'd line up and play a 60-minute football game against each other and wear each other out. But I think it would allow you to get some pads on, do some full team work, get some 11-on-11 going, kind of figure out your depth chart a little bit more than you will in the spring.
I'm going to put you on the spot here because I don't totally know at all. But when is there, like, next year we could have a uniform calendar, or what is on the horizon of like this screwed up calendar is going to get changed? Is there anything on the horizon like that?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, they come out of AFC. They come out of AFCA every year with recommendations, but that doesn't mean anything, right? Like, the coaches like recommend a thing, and then people on the internet run and like, hey, see, look, they're about to fix it. And it's like, well, I mean, I make recommendations to my local government all the time, and they've yet to listen, and it's like, it's the same thing. the federal government's eventually going to have to fix this deal, but I don't see how it gets fixed until the players are on contracts, because every single time you try to do something, it's an antitrust law violation. And until there's uniformity, until everybody's playing by their same rules, and until the players can unionize and have some kind of a say, I just don't see how they can force any real meaningful change that becomes uniform across the board that doesn't get sued into oblivion.
When's the last time the NCAA won in the courtroom? They're on a massive losing streak right now.
Probably the 80s or something. It's been a really long time because we all knew that everything they do has been illegal, right? Like they had no standing to do it. They just had the power to kind of put their finger on people. And now that they don't have that power anymore, and that's been shaken to its core, they have no real legs to stand on. And that's why you're seeing the SEC and the Big Ten kind of fill that power vacuum, which I would argue is even worse for the sport, unless you're a fan of one of those, 15 or 20 teams in those conferences that have a chance.
Yep. So that is spring game talk and fixing the
Eat at Arby's
calendar. What was that?
I said eat at Arby's.
Eat at Arby's, baby.
Nihilist.
Eat at Arby's and shop at homefieldapparel.com using promo code DCTF. You like that segue, Craven? It's promo code DCTF at Homefield Apparel, guys. They've got the best college merch out there. I love getting stuff from all the Texas teams. They go 13 FBS teams. They have all the non-FBS schools. Shout out Corey Hogue. I know he loves to have some drip from the non-FBS schools. So, guys, head on over to homefieldapparel.com. Promo code DCTF. Start getting that spring wear. Weather's starting to warm up. Get into the 70s. Get some of those short sleeves, some vintage tees, guys. Homefieldapparel.com. Promo code DCTF. Okay, we've talked what's all jacked up about the spring and the spring calendar and spring games. Let's talk about what we're excited for. Let's do a spring storyline draft. So we're going to go in the snake draft. I'm going to be a gracious host, and Craven, you're going first. You're getting 101. But then I actually get 2 and 3 right there. So this is the value draft right there. Spring storylines. You can go any school, any of the 13 FBS teams. What are you most looking forward to this spring?
I guess it's the Arch Manning, just kind of getting that going.
Obvious 1.01.
It's rare in college. The head coaches are usually the stars. And that becomes even more true with NIL and the transfer portal and all the movement. Like the head coaches stay, the players tend to leave, even if it's to graduate and go to the NFL. And so it's the Nick Sabans and the Kirby Smarts and the Steve Sarkisians that typically get the headlines and are the power brokers. We haven't seen something like this. Like we haven't seen an Arch Manning type level of fame. Johnny Manziel, Tim Tebow. It's that kind of celebrity that we're bringing into.
He just got an Uber NIL deal today. Right. And Red Bull. He started like 2 games.
Yeah. He's a Manning, obviously. He's at the University of Texas. They're starting the season at Ohio State. We've kind of seen Quinn Ewers and what he is at Texas, and I think everybody's excited to kind of see if he can elevate that even more, right? If he can take even a further step with this Texas team, if they're national championship contenders. So, as somebody who's into narratives, as much as I am into the sport of college football, Arch Manning is, let's face it, SEO gold for folks like us, and it's going to be endless storylines. It's going to be funny watching the national guys kind of swoop in and mischaracterize it like they always do, right? Because they're not on the ground every single day. It's going to be funny watching the beat writers get mad about that. And so I'm ready to enjoy the ride and the hoopla. Texas always has plenty of it, but this is going to get turned to 11.
That Texas versus Ohio State game in the Horseshoe week 1. When's the last time that there's been a week 1 game with this much hype, do you think? I mean, I can't remember one. This is insane.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're the 2 betting favorite. Not that I look at betting lines all year around, but they're the 2 betting favorites.
Not that I'm on that in March 4th.
Right. Not that one of those windows is open right now behind me. But yeah, they're the 2 betting favorites going into the season. Ohio State knocks Texas out of the playoffs last year, obviously. Kudos to both of those programs for keeping those kind of games on the schedule during this period. So, I'm really excited to see what the Arch Manning stuff is. Every single throw is going to be dissected. every single message board is going to have insider notes on how he performed and what assistant coaches are saying and all this kind of stuff. Like, it is going to be an absolute circus. And I'm of the opinion, you've heard me say this all the time, I think college football is at its best when it's like WWE, and we need to lean into the circus and do the narratives and do the heels. And Texas is always a hated institution for the amount of hype that they get, sometimes undeserved. And Arch is only going to add to that fire if you're an outsider, and it's only going to add to the arrogance if you're an insider, right? And those two things are good for the sport.
I've been wondering, though, if Texas fans are going to jump down Arch's throat for every sack and missed throw he takes like they did for Quinn Ewers, or if they're going to blame all his mistakes on other people.
I think it depends on that Ohio State game.
Okay. How he plays there is going to make it depend.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, though, because there's a love affair with the fan base, right? Like, they are all in on Arch Manning. They are ready for Arch Manning, even though they just had a quarterback that stabilized this program for the first time in ages. That's going to go to the NFL. That was a former 5-star top-rated prospect in himself. You could always tell that this fan base was ready for the next thing. Like, they are ready for the next, the hot girl at the bar is better than the girlfriend. And that is what has happened with this fan base over this last year or two. Like, they've been clamoring for this. It's finally here. Either way it goes. If it's a disaster, if it's a masterclass, if it's in between, it is going to be storylines. It's going to be talking points. It's going to be on First Take and all the national shows that never talk about college football. Like, Texas is going to be the epicenter of college football in 2025, no matter what happens. And we just rarely see that because of a player, because there's helmets and you're 50 yards away from every single football player. It's not basketball where like the stars are the players. And so it's just an interesting dynamic for a program that hasn't always handled distractions well, but seems to be doing better under Steve Sarkisian. Is going to be the ultimate test of kind of culture and character. I'm excited to kind of see how it goes.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor the Quinn Ewers Arch Manning debate too much. I mean, they had to deal with that for 2 years, but it's been crazy from the outside watching Texas fans and the treatment of Quinn Ewers, who, look, I was always not like, this guy's amazing. I felt like I was pretty measured on Ewers for the most part this whole last season. This was before I knew he played with an oblique tear, which is like, okay, holy crap, dude, that's insane toughness. If you would have rewound to 2020 when Quinn Ewers decommitted from Texas, and basically that was why Tom Herman got fired, and if you had told Texas fans then that, hey, he's going to not only come back to Texas, but lead you to 2 college football playoff appearances, 2 conference championship games, they would have gotten on their knees and ascended into heaven, like, with how happy they would have been with that. And then you fast forward to when he did that, everyone was just waiting for him to leave and kicking him out the door, basically. It was crazy to me. Back on, we'll move on again. Arch is just so fun to talk about, so let's just get it off, fire all the takes out there. Is it a weird sign for Arch Manning that he didn't play more if Quinn Ewers had an oblique tear? Or is that just Sark going with the guy who can gut through it and play through it, and he deserves to play?
It's a great, I think only Sarkisian probably knows that answer. I always lean towards Sark was a quarterback himself, and he probably doesn't believe in any 2 quarterback systems, and he wasn't trying to create any drama that he didn't need to create. Because there's no guarantee that last year's Arch Manning is better than last year's Quinn Ewers. Like, maybe Arch Manning's upside is better. Maybe we look at his NFL career in 10 years and are like, wow, how did Quinn Ewers start in front of Arch Manning for a year or two? But in that present moment, like, Ewers has played so much. He had so much trust of his teammates. He had so much trust in the coaching staff. I think he had done a lot for the University of Texas. I think Sark ran with the guy he was loyal to. And I don't think it was a bad decision. I would have used
me neither.
I would have used Arch I would have used Arch on 2nd and 1 against Ohio State, right? Like, I would have used Arch in a few different ways, but I think it was the right call what he did, because we got to remember, he gave Arch the chance to take the job. Like, that's what happened in the Georgia game, right? Like, he handed Arch the opportunity. If Arch goes and leads 2 consecutive touchdown drives against Georgia and they win that football game, Quinn Ewers never starts again, in my opinion, at Texas. Right. But he didn't. He looked just like Quinn Ewers, if not worse, in that football game. I think he was still young. He hadn't gotten as much practice time, all that stuff that we kind of roll our eyes out, but like matters for a quarterback in a high level system. Give him a whole offseason, give him a whole spring, let him grow into the job, let him get comfortable with it. I think we're going to see the best Arch Manning because of that. I think it was the best. I think Sark did that correctly, even if it wasn't perfectly.
Yeah, I think so too. And I saw you released your Texas 10 quarterback yesterday, and great year for the state of Texas in quarterbacks. But spoiler alert, guys, Arch Manning's #1 because even in limited time, he looked awesome last year. Okay, I know a lot of his most extensive game action came against 7-6 UTSA, 5-7 Louisiana Monroe, 2-10 Mississippi State. But he passed the eye test. He's honestly passed the media test for me, the way he's handled all this. His interview with Marty Smith, I thought was great, where he was like, I haven't done anything yet, haven't proved myself yet. So early returns look good. I think he's got a chance to be very, very special. All right. I'm going to go with my first pick. My spring storyline I'm excited to watch is Texas Tech's talent overhaul. We talked about this the last Republic of Football, so we won't go as long on this topic, but $10 million in the portal, got James Blanchard back, the director of player personnel, general manager, totally revamped the defensive line, secondary that was much maligned last year, last in the Big 12 in passing yards allowed per game. Joey McGuire's going to need like a little like wristband, like shock collar thing for every time he's in the media and talking, because he's gonna want to talk about how awesome this team is in spring practice. He's gonna need a little buzzer like, hey, just don't give it all away yet. Don't give it all away yet, because he's gonna get so excited in spring. They got a lot of dudes, man. It's gonna be fun to watch this offseason.
Yeah, really overhauled the offensive line and the defensive line. Could have 3 new starters on both units. Howard Sampson from North Carolina, probably going to be their starter at left tackle. Then you got Hunter Zambrano and Will Jadis also along the offensive line, going to slide in there somewhere. Remember, Vinny Scurry coming back from injury. They were really high on him kind of going into last year, and then didn't get him for the season. And so that's really, 4 kind of new faces to improve that offensive line around Sheridan Wilson, who played really good. Davion Carter's still there. But what they did on defense, I think, is what's really going to show. And they were awful. Like, there's no way around that. That's why Tim DeRuyter is no longer the defensive coordinator at Texas Tech. They weren't good last year. I think a lot of it was personnel, and they went and solidified that. Lee Hunter going to be in the Texas 10 as one of the top interior defensive linemen. Romello Height kind of gives them an edge rusher that they haven't had in a few years there to kind of get some sacks. They really like Bryce Pollock, the cornerback from Mississippi State. They think he's a freak of nature. And so I just think that they probably have like 6, 7, 8 new starters just straight from the transfer portal to build around. They're going to be good. They're going to be talented. And we're going to, it eliminates any excuses for Texas Tech, right? Like, you have to go compete for a Big 12 championship. They've spent the money on players. They spent the money on facility. They spent the money on coaching staff with a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator. It's year 4 for Joey McGuire. Like, we'll see. We'll see what it has. They have to start fast, which is something they haven't done. They have to win on the road, which is something they haven't done. But the personnel is going to be there to compete in the Big 12.
Have you finished all the Texas 10s yet?
I'm still doing cornerback and safety right now.
Okay, but you've done majority of them. How prevalent is Texas Tech in these Texas 10s? You've been doing them for 3 years now. Like, is it a lot more Tech players than you're used to putting in there, or is it kind of same with other years? Like, what's it looking like right now? No spoilers, of course.
Yeah, no, there is a lot more. There's a lot more opportunities for a second guy, right? There was always like one dude here, one dude there, one wide receiver, but it's like at wide receiver, how do you leave off Caleb Douglas or Coy Eakin?
No, you can't. Yeah.
Like at offensive line, do you leave off Sampson or Zambrano? Those are 2 of the best transfer offensive linemen you could find. Defense tackle, Lee Hunter, Skylar Gill, Howard. And then they have Anthony Holmes coming in from Houston, who was awesome for the Cougars last year at defensive tackle, for a defensive coordinator in Shale Wood that's coming over. So, like I said, linebacker, Ben Roberts, Jacob Rodriguez. You got to put both of those guys on there probably. And so they just have multiple guys that are able, like, there's depth there at Texas Tech that hasn't been there. And you would expect that when you spend $10 million in the transfer portal and, another 15, 20 on the roster. They are taking an advantage of this Wild West, no holds bar transfer portal stuff. Like Cody Campbell, John Sellers are all in. They got the money to spend.
Cody Campbell's all liquid now too. He just sold that company, didn't he?
Yeah.
He liquidated his assets for Texas Tech football. Yeah.
To an SMU guy, by the way, to Dave Miller, who is the reason SMU basketball is hanging around in ACC. So, I think Tech is as talented as they've been in my memory, and we'll see if that translates to 9 or 10 wins, because it needs to. Like, that's the expectation now.
It'll be an exciting storyline to watch in the spring. My second pick, I'm going to go a little bit off the board here. I'm going Texas State quarterback competition. It was a bit of a disappointing year for Texas State. I'm going to say that they came in with college football playoff expectations, which were definitely overblown. Like, that would have been overachieving, in my opinion, but still the same record as last year when you had Jordan McLeod, when you had Joey Hobart, Ishmael Mahdi coming back. It was a bit of a disappointment. They're throwing like 4 quarterbacks into the spring competition. I mean, it is Giovanni McCoy, who was number 10 on that Texas 10 list. He was the freshman of the year at Idaho, a Walter Payton Award semifinalist, which is the FCS Heisman. And then last year at Oregon State, he had like 1,300 yards and 3 touchdowns. I don't think he was the full-time starter. Was he injured at all? No,
I just don't think he fit in. I just think it was too big of a jump. I think the Sun Belt may be the right space for him.
So it's him, Holden Gariner, who is a 3-year backup at Auburn, Nate Yarnell, former Lake Travis, Austin guy, 6'6", 215 pounds. He comes in from Pitt, so a lot better weather to sling the football around in. And then there's Brad Jackson, the incumbent backup from last year, who got a bit of playing time. I know last spring at the magazine visit, Kenny told Ish Johnson that like Jackson could be like program legend. Like, he could be one of the best to come through Texas State. They were very high on him back then. I bet they're still high on him, but Kenny just loves to throw a bunch of quarterbacks in the mix and see who comes out the alpha dog.
I actually love it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, usually you treat the quarterback position with kitten gloves and you worry about bringing in some people and maybe that upsets people that are there and then they leave. And I think Kenny, just with his NFL experience, being a guy who was cut, being a guy who was moved to different positions in the NFL, who was kept on, as like an assistant in a lot of ways as a player. I think he just kind of is like, hey, in this new world, like, we're going to populate this position. It's the most important position in this sport. We're going to populate this position and figure out what to do from there. He had Malik Hornsby. Everybody thought that was going to be the guy. He didn't completely enjoy what he saw in the spring. Went out and got TJ Finley. I think a lot of the fans want Brad Jackson to be the guy. He was there. He's a fun player to watch. He can run around. Kenny is really high on him. But when you bring 3 other quarterbacks in, to me, it just suggests that that's wide open, and Brad Jackson isn't the surefire starter. The other part that's fascinating to me is, like, you list those 4 quarterbacks, they don't play it all that similarly, right? Those are like,
no, they're all different quarterbacks.
That's the part that's interesting. It's not kind of like, hey, we're going to bring in this type of player, we're going to bring in 3 or 4 of them, and the best one's going to win. It's kind of like a style makes fight situations where, like, there's going to be a guy that does this thing better than this guy, and that guy's going to do better. And like that's going to be kind of what flavor of ice cream does Kenny end up kind of wanting at the end of this when the smoke clears, because there's not one template here with these 4 guys.
I feel like they're all pretty much unknown too. I know Giovanni McCoy did a lot of great things in the FCS, but especially after that Oregon State year, just not a great fit like you're talking about. Like, I felt a lot better last year about Jordan McLeod than I do about any of these options. So that is very interesting for me. And now this could be like, clip this right now, Texas State fans. We're going to come back in middle of the season next year when one of these guys is all conference, and turns out to be really good. I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm just saying right now it seems like a hodgepodge of unknowns, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and G5 football is so tough right now. Like, that's going back to the Texas 10 conversation. That's been the hardest part. Is there used to be 4 or 5 guys in the G5 that I could populate those lists with, right? Like, I could spread the love. I could include a bunch of schools. But as I got into running back, wide receiver, especially offensive line, again, I think this is crazy. There is not an all-conference player at the G5 level who's still there. They either graduated, left to the NFL, or transferred up. And so you just constantly have to do these 1-year turnaround things. Like, everything is a 1-year proposition. And I think that's why GJ Kinney's strategy is good. You're not building for something that may never come. You need to go win right now. And the team that you can put together this year is all that matters, because if somebody pops off, you're not going to have them anyway, right? If like Brad Jackson ends up being the starter, throws for 3,000 yards, rushes for 1,000 yards, leads Texas State to a Sun Belt, buddy, he's gone. GJ may be gone too in that scenario, right? And so there is no reason, unless you have like an Owen McCown, like somebody who's really established themselves and is still there. Those are few and far between. I think it's more and more necessary to do it the way Kenny's doing it. And that's just to load up at positions with as much talent as you can and just see where it settles.
All right. Those are my 2 picks. Let's go back in the snake to you, Craven. Second pick.
I'm taking the Houston Cougars offensive overhaul.
Love it.
New offensive coordinator in there, Slade Nagel coming in. Was with Willie Fritz at Tulane, was his offensive coordinator there the last year that they had that rolling. I think that there's going to be 9 new starters for Houston on the offensive side of the ball. Steven Johnson, David Ndukwe, their left tackle, probably going to be the only 2 remaining starters. Everybody else is going to be different. It's going to be 4 new offensive linemen. There's going to be a couple new wide receivers. Connor Wigman, obviously, the big ad name, former quarterback at Texas A&M, 5-star prospect that grew up pretty close to Cypress Bridgeland. I love the Dean Connors ad. They were the 2nd worst scoring offense in the country last year. Only Kent State was worse than Houston. New offensive coordinator, like I just said, a complete line shift across the whole offense. Like it is, you just rarely see that in year 2. Like you expect that in year 1, but just going from year 1 to year 2 is like a brand new situation for the Cougars. It can only go up, but we'll see how much it'll go up.
All right, let's talk about the personnel a bit because I some of these guys are really intriguing. You mentioned Dean Connors. I want to get your opinion on him soon, but it's got to start with Connor Wegman. The Connor Wegman Reclamation Project is probably one of the most underrated storylines going into the season. I mean, who would have thunk he is the number 9th rated quarterback in the state in the Texas 10? I had a tweet. I'm going to tattle on myself right here. I had a tweet last offseason. I was like, Connor Wegman is going to be first-team All-SEC in Mike Elko's offense. And it was a nightmare, honestly. And injuries, inconsistency, just sometimes poor play. I mean, chalk it up to what you will. Sometimes it's just an off year. And that's what it was for Wegman. Like, what is your confidence level in just him as a quarterback? Because he had like dark horse. If he stays healthy, he's first-round NFL draft potential before last season.
When Connor Wigman was coming out of Bridgeland, I think I would have described him as competitive and athletic. And he has lost both of those things, right? Like he has lost his athleticism because of injuries, as we've talked about. And I think he's lost his like competitiveness. And by that, I mean kind of his confidence.
Yes, I agree.
Because of the Jimbo Fisher 40,000 page binder, he gets a new offensive coordinator that wants more of a mobile, athletic quarterback. When we just mentioned Wigman with the injuries in his lower body, just not as athletic as it used to be. You know, we saw what happened with King when he got away from Jimbo and got to Georgia Tech. Haynes has kind of become a pretty solid ACC quarterback. I think what Willie Fritz is really good at on the offensive side of the ball is like building up the confidence, especially in his quarterbacks. He doesn't make them do anything more than they're capable of doing. I think going back and looking at Michael Pratt and what he did at Tulane is going to be the blueprint here. Wigman's not going to be asked to throw the ball 45 times a game. It's going to be play action. It's going to run the football. It's going to be some RPOs. It's going to push the ball down the field, check the ball down when he has to, just be a cerebral kind of bus driving quarterback. And I think Wigman is more than capable of doing that. A new situation, new coaching staff, new teammates, new opportunity. I think sometimes that's good for all of us, especially college-age football players.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Other Guys movie when it's like Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg. It's like she calls the Febreze brothers because it's feeling so fresh in here for the fresh start. Like that's exactly what Wegman needs because you're right. He didn't lose his competitiveness. He lost his confidence though, and I saw it just on TV. It just screamed like looking into like his face when they would zoom in on him. I just didn't like the look in his eye, and I think he can get it back for sure. Just needs a fresh start.
We called it though, like that Colin Klein hire was always weird when you considered Wegman being the starter, right? It was like, is Klein going to change his offense to suit Wigman, or is he going to force Wigman to suit the offense? And neither one kind of happened. And that's why Marcel Reed became the quarterback. Like, I don't think Marcel Reed's like a better quarterback than Connor Wigman. I think Marcel Reed is a better fit for what A&M wants to do offensively than Connor Wigman. And maybe getting into a system that's more in line with what Wigman can do unlocks his potential. We look back and we go, oh, he was a top 5 quarterback in the state the whole time. It just wasn't matching for him. I just hope he can stay healthy. That way we know one way or the other.
Same. Same. Let's hope for his health. So yeah, just know one way or the other. The offensive line, it's a bunch of power four transfers that I don't know anything about, honestly. But if you're transferring from power four school, it's like, hey, the logo looks nice, but also you're probably transferring because you couldn't really play there. So they need to prove themselves. Is there anyone on this offensive line that you know about or like you think is should be really good?
I mean, Dalton Merriman started a while at tackle for Texas Tech, but they just spent a lot of money on some future NFL type offensive linemen. So he kind of sees the writing on the wall there. Same with Alvin Aboselli. I can never say his last name. I'm so bad.
Sounds right.
Same thing kind of happened with him at Baylor. He was a starter for a while, gets replaced. Writing on the wall. He stays within the Big 12. Matthew Wyckoff was a 4-star offensive lineman. Who's played some major college football. And so it just seems like guys who kind of got lost in the shuffle or maybe weren't part of the top 5 at their original school, they can go be that in Houston. That's the position that probably needed to improve the most. Like the Houston Cougars offensive line last year was absolutely atrocious. Didn't give Zion Chris or any of those guys much of a chance offensively. So we'll see if they're able to do that. I will say, I think they're all really good run blockers. It's the pass pro that we'll have to figure out. But I think that's where the play action pass and stuff like that can kind of help hide some of that.
And run blocking for Dean Connors. I was on Our Lads. Shout out Our Lads. Love their depth charts. They had Dean Connors slotted at first string running back. And I was like, are you for real? Like, is he going to be first string running back, you think?
Oh, yeah. Dean Connors is going to be in the Texas 10 for sure. His versatility is just hard to keep off the football field. He's probably the best pass catching running back in the country. I think he had over 70 catches last year.
He was like Rice's whole offense last year.
Yeah. He helped beat Houston a couple years ago in the Bayou Bucket. Like, I think Dean Connors is really, really good. Maybe not like NFL prospect good, but a great college running back. Like, seems like the perfect Willie Fritz player. Just can do it all. Swiss Army knife, doesn't mind getting physical, can help in special teams. I don't think he's like the only running back. I don't think he's like bell cow type of stuff. I do think that they, use some other guys and, Rashawn Sanford, some of those guys.
I like Rashawn Sanford. Yeah.
So I don't think Dean Connors is going to be Earl Campbell where he's, carrying the ball 35 times a game or anything. But I bet we look back at the end of the year and he's the most productive running back in the Houston running back room. Like that would be my prediction.
Okay, so we love Dean Connors at running back there. The wide receiver room, I don't know what to think of it, right? Because Stephon Johnson had 402 receiving yards on 32 receptions. That led the team. So, like, if you want a snapshot of Houston's offense last year, that's it. Amari Thomas from UAB, I like a lot. 62 catches, 670 yards, 8 touchdowns. Seems like he's a pretty good wide receiver. The other guy, Harvey Broussard from Louisiana, I was just looking at the roster, and one of his stats was like enters the year with a catch in 10 straight games. And I was like, that is such a cherry-picked stat. Like, that is not what you want to see there for a starting wide receiver. What do you think about the wide receiver room?
Yeah, with Broussard, I guess I'm trusting kind of the Fritz and Nagel Louisiana ties there. Like, I'd imagine they've recruited him. They've known him for a while. They kind of probably see his upside. I don't ever trust offensive linemen that really come from the smaller level up or defensive linemen come from the smaller level up. I would go SMU, right? Where it's like, I'll take Georgia's third best defensive tackle and make him our starter rather than, going Stephen F. Austin's defensive tackle and making him the starter. But at wide receiver, I am the opposite. Like, give me production, like production plays at the skill position stuff. I love the Amari Thomas pickup. I think that stuff will work. In the passing game, the sneaky one to me is Luke McGarry at tight end. This is going to be a very keep it tight, in-house offense that runs the football, that's physical, and then goes over the top of you. I mean, that's what they did so well at Tulane. I'm just assuming that's what's going to be going on at Houston, having a tight end that can block and go pass catch. Like, they're the biggest mismatches on offenses now. As defenses got smaller and smaller and smaller, tight ends got more and more important, and they're back in vogue. I think Houston's going to use theirs a lot. And I think McGarry is one of the sneakier good pickups in the state.
All right, Houston offensive overhaul off the board. I'm lost in the snake right now. You up? I think it's your last pick, then my last pick.
Okay, I'll go TCU run game. Josh Hoover's a stud. Like, Josh Hoover's really good. They're losing a lot at wide receiver, but I like what they're doing through the portal to replace it. Joseph Manjack, those guys. Dwyer is a really good player from Idaho.
Joey Manjack.
I just talked about my affinity for FCS skill players moving up. I think Dwyer is going to be awesome. But they got to run the damn football. Like, they just have to take some pressure off of Josh Hoover. He had 4 games last year where he threw more than 1 interception. It's because they're asking him to do so dang much. If they can take a little bit off, it's a less is more proposition for him. If they can take a little bit off his plate by just becoming average at running the football, they don't have to be great. But if they can threaten with the run game, take some pressure off of Hoover, especially in the red zone, all of a sudden TCU becomes more efficient. They can be more ball control. They can help out their defense a little bit. They don't have to 2003 Texas Tech you, right, where they just beat you 54-46 and just hope to outlast you. When they were really good in 22, they had Kendre Miller and they were a balanced offense. Like, Kendall Briles, in theory, likes to run the football. Like, the Briles' offense always got the press clippings for the passing yards, but they were as balanced as balance could get. Like, they were always good at running the football. If they can find a way to be more two-dimensional, TCU's got a shot to be a dark horse in the Big 12, in my opinion.
Yeah, Josh Hoover set the single-season program record with 3,949 passing yards, and I would honestly argue if he sets it again this year, the season was a failure. Like, it's not a good sign if he has to set that record because they just don't have any balance. This is probably an unknowable question unless you're really in the meeting room, but like, how much of the running game issues do you think were offensive line issues and how much were running back issues? Like, Cam Cook was the starter. He's gone now. He averaged like 3.9 yards per carry. He's at Jacksonville State. But they're going to have all seniors on the interior of the offensive line. Do those guys need to get better, or was it a running back issue, or where's the blame lie there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would always take a dominant offensive line and an average running back than a dominant running back and an average offensive line, because I think the offensive line tends to dictate more of what happens in the run game. I would suggest the TCU offensive line was a little finesse last year. Good in pass pro, not so good at just turning downhill and just knocking a MF-er over. You know, like, they just didn't thrive in that. And I think that comes from the staff. Like, you have to like establish that kind of culture up front. There was a lot of transfers coming in. I just don't think that became part of it. The defense wasn't good at stopping the run, and I think that gave them a false sense of security in the spring. Like, hey, we're running the ball a little bit. But it was because that defense stunk so much. They had no idea how hard it was going to be to run. They just didn't move anybody. But I don't want to say they were a bad offensive line, because I think they were really good at pass protection. Like, they gave Josh Hoover a lot of time. Their PFF grades are really good on the pass side of it. But they have to get more physical. They have to move people more. They have more continuity up front this year going into the next season. I like their guards a lot. We'll see what happens at center to replace James Brockemeyer. But they bring in Kavorian Barnes at running back. They really like Jeremy Payne. Trent
I like
Battle's
Jeremy Payne a lot too.
So I think that they've improved both the offensive line and the running game. Now it just comes down to philosophy and culture, in my opinion. And that's what they have to establish in the spring, is some nastiness. Like, they need to be a little bit tougher on both sides, the defense too. Like, in the trenches, TCU has to get a little bit tougher to take the next step and to get back into contention.
There's another team out there that needs to be a little bit tougher on the defensive side. That's going to round it out for my last pick. It's Texas A&M. And I say this, guys, because after their bowl loss to USC, Mike Elko is literally banging the table like, we cannot cover the forward pass, and that's the story of our season, of losing like 4 of the last 5 games. We talked a little bit about it, like stock up, stock down. I think, Craven, you and I agree we're a little bit stock down for year 2. And a lot of it has to do with Shamar Stewart being gone, Nick Skuriton, Shamar Turner, losing a lot of production on that defensive line. I think the secondary should be better because Mike Elko is going to make sure it's better. But I don't know if that defensive line picks up the slack. Like, I think the defensive line gets worse and the secondary gets better, and it kind of evens out to the same thing.
Yeah, I think this probably doesn't make for a good podcast, but I think I'm right there with you on that. I can't believe Mike Elko's secondary is going to be bad 2 years in a row. Like, it just seems like something that's not possible. I like what they did with some staff changes on the back end. Julian Humphrey is a high leverage hit or miss type prospect. That if he hits his upside, then then they're really good. I like Will Lee on the other side. They weren't very good at safety last year, like especially in the back end of the safety position. They moved Bryce Anderson kind of back to free safety, and I don't think that went as well as they thought it was going to do. Maybe another offseason figuring that out helps. They just weren't athletic enough back there. But like in general, I don't know how you can tell me you lose Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, Nick Skirton, and you're better defensively. Mm-hmm. Like you'd have to get so much more sound and fundamental and just better coach. Like they're going to count on that because they underperformed with those guys, with NFL athletes up front. They underperformed defensively. Maybe I'm too married to the personnel aspect of college football, but to me, it's still the Janes and the Joes. And I think Texas A&M is worse talent-wise on the defensive side of the ball in 2025 than they were in 2024. So until I see it, I just can't believe there's going to be a real jump there.
I do like Ryland Kennedy a lot.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be awesome, but I don't know who those other guys are.
Yeah, Cassius Howell, from Bowling Green came in last year and kind of waited his turn. He's a really good pass rusher. They picked up a few guys in the portal like Searcy from Florida. I can't say his last name, but Tyler, I'm going to butcher this. Onyedim?
Sounds right.
Onyedim. We should edit some of that. That's going to make me crazy. But it's spring. They don't have the pronunciation charts out yet. You know what I mean? When you go to the roster and all that kind of stuff.
We're in the off season.
That's right. This is still off season for us as well. But yeah, I just think the personnel is taking a step back. Not a huge step back. I mean, A&M's A&M. Like they have some football players. But Regis is going to have to take a big step forward. DJ Hicks kind of coming alive maybe helps a lot on the defense side. I like their linebacker position. Obviously, York, Scooby Williams, those guys. As you mentioned, secondary should be better. But I'm going to have to see that defensive line perform before I think A&M takes a big jump in year 2.
All right, that's our spring storyline draft. I think pretty interesting spring. I mean, just overall, a lot of great quarterbacks in Texas. We think the Power 4, I mean, who knows with the G5 because it's just all new players every year. Power 4 should be pretty salty this year for Texas. Then again, going into last year, we thought it was going to be a down year, and there was 2 playoff teams. So, it's impossible to predict in March, but a lot of exciting storylines for this spring. Craven, any closing thoughts at the bell?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick another one, my 7th storyline is just what the hell is the G5, right? Like that is what, you used to kind of have an idea of what these teams are, but like, what is Sam Houston what is their roster? Like, what is their starting lineup going to be? UTSA defensively has to replace a ton. What are they going to look like? North Texas is kind of like Sam Houston light mixed with some of their returning players. Kind of what does Skylar Cassidy do over there? This was a crazy thing in the Texas 10. I didn't mention a North Texas quarterback, but I'm sure one of them is going to throw for 3,500 yards.
Oh yeah. 100%.
I just don't know which one. And so I just think, UTEP's a huge Rice running the option. What the hell is that going to look like? Like, it is just very, very hard to get a handle on what the G5 looks like. I'm excited for spring football to kind of get more of an idea because I text these coaches and they don't even know, right? Like, hey, text me in a month, bro. Like I'll tell you who's looking good then. So it just seems like huge question marks there for those 6 programs in the state. We'll see who kind of emerges as maybe a conference contender.
Who are like the North Texas quarterback battles? Because that's an underrated one to do with Texas State. It's Poffenbarger from Miami and then Drew Mestemaker, who was fantastic in the bowl game, the former walk-on. Is there a third guy floating around, or is it kind of those 2?
I think it's those 2. I got a text message from a couple of North Texas people about like not putting a quarterback in there that like balled out on Texas State in the bowl game.
Yep.
But yeah, we'll see.
It was a sick bowl game.
It wasn't. You were there.
Yeah, it was awesome. I'm gonna think Drew Mestemaker, no matter what happens, I will forever be like he's a Hall of Famer based off seeing that bowl game.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be Poffenbarger. He's a senior. He's played major football. I don't think you bring in somebody like that to back up a former walk-on. But you have to have some confidence in your backup after he went out there and did it kind of in a live audience situation against a pretty solid G5 team that was still playing a lot of their starters. So I have no doubt that one of North Texas's quarterbacks will end the season as one of the 10 best in the state. I just have to see him throw for more than like 3 completions in a regular season game first.
Yeah.
Like I poo-poo the bowl season more than I probably should. But I'm going to need to see it in like September before I put him on a list.
Well, I saw you reply to it. Like by the end of the season, like Mike Craven or Carter Yates could be the quarterback, and we'd throw for 3,500 yards.
More you than me, probably. But we'll see.
Not by much.
I gotta, you hit 40 and your AC joint starts messing with you. So, I would need some off-season surgery before I was prepared. Speaking of being a dad, that's one of the things that I've started to kind of reminisce or kind of come to grips with is like my body. I never thought it mattered. And now it's like, oh crap, I got to do stuff for like the next 10 or 15 years. So I got to get back to the orthopedic shop, see if they can fix me up a little bit. Got a knee, got a shoulder. We'll see how it goes. You're getting old, man. Don't get old. I don't recommend it. Stay young.
Yeah, you're going to need to get all that checked out before you start bending under the couch to reach for toys and stuff.
Yeah. Or before we start having some softball camps or some volleyball camps or whatever she gets into. Because the only way I don't – how did your parents parent you? My parents only parented me by like putting me in sports. Like that was how I was raised, was like by competition and on teams and stuff. So I don't know what to do other than to be like, all right, I guess it's volleyball season. Like get out there and do something. Like, stay off the streets. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
That was how it went for me too. And hence why I'm working in sports now, because
keep busy.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, for Mike Craven, I am Carter Yates signing off the Republic of Football podcast. We will be back next week on StreamYard and podcast over.